Everything works fine until one person takes a day off.
When you're first starting, your network map is, right here. Somebody else needs it, well, then they need to ask, and you'll release whatever you need to.
And what happens when those processes only exist in someone's head?
There's efficiencies in that you may not realize out of the gate because you're trying to get anybody that you can get installed. But if I've got Johnny going from the west side of town to the east side of town, I'm losing 2 hours in install time.
In this episode, we're breaking down how growth exposes operational gaps most ISPs don't see coming.
The thought of artificially putting your foot on that brake, I'd be worried that by the time I've got my equilibrium back, I don't know if I'm going to be able to start that engine and regain that momentum. All right, here we are again. We're digging into operations today, talking about maybe things that you don't even maybe clock as an operational bottleneck, but really at the end of the day, that's what it is. And maybe if you can identify that, you can do something about it. So what do you think? Should we kick it off with something general? What about areas in the ISP where they don't realize how much they're going to have to scale to keep up with their customer growth?
Well, I think the first one is when you start your ISP, you have so many manual operations. And if you're not paying attention, you start scaling those customers, but you haven't scaled the manual processes. And the manual processes don't scale. That's usually the problem with them, is that now you're adding X number of customers, which is 10 times more than you were.
Right.
Well, this process that used to be okay at 1X is not okay at 10X. So that's one of the places I think that you see. I think one of the other places you don't realize when you're scaling is like lifecycle management for inventory. I mean, when we first started, I don't even think we thought of lifecycle management for inventory.
Right.
And you really need to consider that because as you scale, you've got so much more in the field. You've got so much more at customers' houses.
You wake up one day with that problem.
To realize that that's something you need to be handling.
Well, and I think that there's stages and steps to all this. You may be a greenfield deployment and you have a bottleneck at a certain point. Maybe you can manage your customer base off of spreadsheets or your inventory off of spreadsheets or your IP assignments off of spreadsheets to 450, 650 accounts. But then you realize that that's really not scalable, right? So there's two choices in that change. Either you're gonna clear that bottleneck, or you're gonna be like, I can't do this. It's too much. It's just too much. And you get distracted from the growth that your company could actually be achieving if you had some automations, if you had some additional opportunities to push those manual processes behind you.
Right. You're playing catch up, and that really costs you because you're taking your attention away from things that otherwise you could be doing because you have no choice at that point. Right. You have to kind of backfill that. When I think about this, one specific area that came to mind was technical support. And I think when you're a greenfield, that almost takes care of itself. Like when you're maybe under 200, 300, maybe even under 500 customers, just the frequency of calls, it's sustainable. In the very beginning, I remember, the tech support calls would end up kind of going to the owner's cell phone, really. And technical support department and processes didn't exist at all. But I remember distinctly, we woke up one day, it's like it was I Love Lucy and the chocolate.
The chocolate, you just couldn't shove them in your mouth or in your hat fast enough.
Exactly.
Right.
And we had to do something, and that was really interesting because we didn't see it coming. We went from nothing to an actual process, and that was interesting. It was interesting for me because that actually meant that was when I had transitioned out from being in the field to birth this technical support process, and we had to figure out how to formalize these things that were just sort of taking care of themselves before, but it hit us like a wall.
Well, and you don't know what you don't know. If you're truly a greenfield, you're trying to learn the technology. You're trying to set up the partnerships. You're trying to get the staff, the appropriate staff that may be your nephew or your wife or your son. Right. A lot of family operations, ISPs started as family-based operations, filling a need that a local rancher actually needed. He never intended to be an ISP operator, but all of a sudden he needed internet, so he became the internet provider for the area. So that's
in our basement, me and my wife.
Yep. out of a need, out of a personal need, right?
Right. Yep.
It's such an interesting conundrum. It really, really is. And but I do see that there's kind of a standard that 500 and then 2,500 seems to be the next.
Plateaus.
But if you don't have a guiding star, if you didn't sit down and think, where do I want to be 1 year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And you can't just write that down and leave it on a shelf and never revisit it. It has to be a living, breathing document, because there may be something that you're like, oh, MDU's the way, MDU's the way. And then you're like, oh, I can't land an MDU because I really don't know the technology that will meet the needs of my footprint appropriately.
Right. And I think that comes down to just sort of being tossed around in the wind, and whatever happens, happens, and whatever phone calls you get are the things that you do, versus taking a bit more of a strategic or proactive approach and trying to control and guide your growth. What do you guys think are the first workflows that tend to break when customer account starts going more vertical? What just doesn't scale by nature?
I already mentioned IP assignments. If you're managing those manually, that gets real ugly real
Sure.
fast.
I say scheduling and field tech management. You know, if you don't have a good process in place for that, when you're doing a few installs, it's okay. You know, hey, we got this one that needs to be done. Go out and do that. You know, Jason, go do that. You know, when you are now doing 15 installs a day over multiple crews, you better have that well documented in
And
place.
there's
It doesn't-
efficiencies in
yeah.
that you may not realize out of the gate, because you're trying to get anybody that you can get installed. But if I've got Johnny going from the west side of town to the east side of town,
Yeah.
back to the west side of town,
You guys
I'm
do route
losing 2
optimization,
hours in install time.
prioritization. You know, there's all that stuff that you don't consider. You're like, oh yeah, we can schedule everybody. We're not doing so many installs we can't, but there are a lot of efficiencies to be gained. Right. We used to, you know, we started setting aside days where we go to certain, because we had enough installs to do that we, you know, really clustered our installs, and it made a huge difference.
But you also have to layer in vehicle maintenance. You know, if that vehicle's in the shop, what is your backup plan? And I really think about every time those tires turning are dollars in your budget. You know, how far are you going to have that field tech go back and forth that wasn't an efficient stop?
Absolutely.
Can they pick up gear somewhere else? What can they do to bring inventory back into the house so it can be redeployed?
I think it's funny how the three of us came up with a completely different answer for this. Sometimes there's just kind of like one obvious thing. And I think that this goes to show that nothing really scales the way that you want it to. For me, this question, my mind immediately went to billing. I think in the early days, sometimes you're billing right out of your accounting program, or you're doing a lot of,
yeah.
Exactly. And manual billing processes. And of course, one day you're going to outgrow that. And I think the sleeper issue behind that, other than like with everything where you're backfilling automation, there's just the pain of the transition. But like when you're doing something manual, or my example of billing, and there's some reason that you have agreed to do what's the word I'm looking for? Like an exception to the rule, right? And you're doing these one-off things for billing. When you're a person sitting there doing everything manually, an exception is no big deal to your process, right? Because it's just, well, whatever. Instead of doing this over here, I do this over there. Yeah, that's all fun and good until then you're trying to transition that into an automated process. And of course, with that, you have to have consistency. And then that's when all of those exceptions will rear their ugly heads.
John gets his disability check on the 21st. So everybody else, their auto pay runs on the 15th, but John's auto pay needs to run on the 22nd.
Sure.
You know, if you have onesie twosies, okay, maybe, but that's not scalable when you've got 15 manual bills that have to be run at specific times.
That's right.
With a sticky note sitting on your second screen on your desktop.
Yep, absolutely. Or
Even beyond billing, like for support and stuff like that. Like we would do special things for people. When you're scaling, when you're just starting your greenfield, you need those customers, and you will do things that aren't scalable. You can't keep doing that. These one-off fares. Even back in the dial-up days, if people weren't getting it hooked up, Shelly or I would go to their house, run through the 9 floppy disk installer program, to get
The 3.5-inch floppy disks.
3.5 inch. Yeah, right. So, it was quite the process, and those don't scale. So try and document clear processes from the beginning, and you'll be in much better shape.
Okay, sidebar. How many floppy disks do you think you still have in your house right now?
Well, I've got quite a Commodore Amiga game collection, probably hundreds.
I probably have hundreds too, but they were the original memory card for digital cameras, and they'd hold 8
right.
pictures. And while I have backed those pictures up because you can buy a converter, right? I just can't let go of those stupid floppies. It's a rainbow of colors.
A floppy disk copier too.
Yeah.
Put in the master and crank out 50 copies and automated.
So, Larry, you had talked about the documentation, and I think that's a really interesting question as well. Where do you find that tribal knowledge seems to concentrate and kind of bite you in the butt?
That tribal knowledge will concentrate everywhere if you're not careful. And so we were like, I came from a tech background, so I knew documentation was so critically important. So from day one, we were pretty heavily documented. But stuff like network maps. When you're first starting, your network map is right here.
Yeah.
This is the entire map, and if somebody else needs it, well, then they need to ask, and you'll release whatever you need to. But getting that out of the getting that written down, and as you scale from 2 employees, Shelley and I, 2 others, you can't be letting others also start doing that, because that was the other risk. Is we system administrator was probably one of the after some tech support people was the next high-end job, and we had a system administrator who didn't want to document anything. I'm like, no, you can't.
That's not the role for that.
You can't keep doing that, because you're doing wonderful things for our network, but I need to be able to repeat those wonderful things if you're not around.
Well, and there's so many wonderful tools available right now that you can fire up as a Teams meeting and have Scribe or something like that, or Fellow even following along with what you're doing in your workflow, and have a document spit out that you can throw into ChatGPT, say, clean this up. This is my standard operating procedure. You can share the screen. It doesn't have to be you talking to anybody else. It could just be you talking to yourself. And even with workflows, I'm working on some standardization internally for my team. I will use ChatGPT to have this dialogue with, thinking my way through what good looks like. And I think that's a great place to start. I don't think it's as hard as it used to be to use those tools and get good quality documentation.
It's easier now than ever.
Yes.
That's a really good point.
I used to say my kids, I would let my kids read the documentation, and if they couldn't
Understand
repeat
it?
the steps, then I didn't have it documented well enough. And they'll tell you that, even they were young, they were 10, 12, but if they couldn't do it, then I didn't document it well enough. So I think
Do you remember the whole For Dummies series, all those books?
Oh, yeah, I've still got probably
that
a
to
whole
me
bunch
is
of
what
those.
SOPs should look like, though. If John Q. Public can't take this SOP and execute what I've written, then I have not done a good job of documenting.
Right.
But do you know where you can't invite your AI note taker?
Where?
The field. And for me, with this question, that is one of the places where this tribal knowledge concentrates, is your, what does an install look like? Because I think, kind of like we were talking about in our MDU episode, I would posit that you cannot necessarily write a, step 1 through X manual on how to do an install. You can at a macro level, but between all those macro steps are these micro decisions, and you learn that through experience, you learn that through time, and trying to harvest that all together and download that and then get it on someone else's brain is really, really hard, because I think there's only a certain amount that you can transfer, and some of it is just learned through experience.
So do you hire for hard skills, or do soft skills play into that decision when you're hiring a field technician that may not have field tech experience?
For me, I'm always a proponent of hiring the person behind the skills. These are really problem-solving type roles, and if you're the kind of employee that needs a manual on how to do things, I don't think you're going to thrive in that role personally. That's not to say you shouldn't endeavor to document your steps and to have as much consistency as possible, but there's always going to be those micro steps in between.
There is a lot of documentable process in the outside, but it's just unique, right? Like the MDU or, every tower install, even though we tried to, cookie cutter it, towers were different.
Yep.
The layout of things, the cable management that we had to deal with, all were semi-unique. So you can document a lot of it, but out in that field, the installers have to be somebody who's going to absorb and learn, because there's knowledge that can be captured and there's knowledge that has to be gained, and you can't always capture everything.
Well, and operational backlogs are a mini Splendor thing, right? You may be in business, but you haven't come up with a plan for what to do if you do have a fiber cut. How do you communicate it to your customers? Do you communicate it to your customers? Do you know a way? Do you have a way to communicate to only the impacted customers? Those are things that you don't think about when you're hanging that
Right.
open sign.
That's true.
From your basement, right?
Yep. And when you're working through that in real time, it's that you don't want to be
It's like
working under
quicksand.
pressure, right? Those are the things that you should be doing and really thinking through and weighing your different paths and choosing it methodically. You can't do that when you're under the gun. So yeah, that's the advantage of, like you said, having that playbook.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Agreed. If you're navigating growth right now, subscribe on YouTube for more operator-first conversations that help you scale without the chaos. All right, we are back with the love it or hate it. I have a feeling we're going to have some, maybe a little bit of conflict with them. There's some pretty good questions here.
Very good questions.
All right, well, without further ado, let's see what you think of the first one.
All right.
Love it or hate it, letting sales outpace your operations. What do we think?
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah, I hate that.
I love it.
Why in the world would you love that?
Why would I love that? Well, and this is maybe just biased, but first of all, sales is a lifeblood of the business. And it is, a bit of a black magic type of thing. If you have true momentum in your sales organization and you're doing things right, the thought of artificially putting your foot on that brake and grinding that to a halt, I'd be worried that by the time I've got my equilibrium back, I don't know if I'm going to be able to start that engine and regain that momentum. So it's a hard thing to say, and it sounds a little counterintuitive, but personally, I'd rather focus my energy on the challenge of solving that operations dip than artificially peeling back on, working active sales conversions.
Yeah, but you don't think, we talk every episode about customer experience and how important that is. And if you let your sales start significantly outperforming your operations, you are going to create that poor customer experience from the get-go. Because if you can't keep up operationally, not great. You've sold it to me. You can't deliver. I think that's one of the things I think, if you're not got good operations in place, you're going to overcommit your network. Now you're going to be providing a bad experience to not only those new sales that caused you to get into this problem, but all your old sales that are relying on your network to be in.
Are you talking about overloading a tower because your operations?
Right. If your operations isn't keeping up with your sales, you're going to overload the tower, the network. It could be at any point, stream bandwidth doesn't just come overnight. So if you have this huge sales influx and you somehow happen to manage it, you could end up having the worst experience for all your customers. We had 6 months, sometimes longer lead times to get new upstream bandwidth put in place.
No, you're right.
So you better be planning operationally to have that in place.
Certainly my plan wouldn't be to keep it that way. There would be a lot of scrambling to try and get that equilibrium back. But those are good points.
Look, I said hate it because of the lead time, because of the customer experience. But I do see your point. I think there's an underlying truth here that is you have to communicate the expectations with the customer. If it happens to be that it's 2 to 3 weeks out before you do the installation, It can't just be, I sold you on January 1st, I'm going to install you on January 21st, and you're not going to hear from me in between. You have to have additional communications along the way saying, ooh, thank you. We're so looking forward to this. In the meantime, take a look at our terms and conditions. Oh, by the way, are you going to go out to the stock show this year? Please stop by our booth and introduce yourself to our marketing team. Try and get some engagement going on so that those 3 weeks pass in a relatively quick manner, but with engagement.
Or even as a token of appreciation, for the time that was unexpected that you had to wait, I'm going to credit you for your first month or something like that.
Turn it into a positive.
We did that.
Sure.
I mean, when we got backlogged on the installs, and that happened because you did have these spikes, and sometimes you could plan for them. Sometimes they just
sometimes it was a
happened.
spike in sales, but sometimes you lost an installer and you just couldn't
right.
backfill it fast enough.
So we would discount installs and stuff like that, or offer first month free or first month discounted. You got to do whatever to keep that customer experience up when your operations is down.
Communication and transparency.
So in
It's
the
key.
end, we don't disagree necessarily on it all, but
But I'm not flipping my
no one's
paddle.
flipping. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Okay, what do we think of this one? Delaying documentation until later. Do we love that or do we hate that?
I hate that.
Hate it.
I'm going to go with love it.
You're so divisive. Larry, we're not going to let him go first this time.
No, because the later never comes. That was my number one point.
It's a bit of a punchline.
Yeah, later it just doesn't happen, and later is that tribal knowledge. When that tribal knowledge then walks out the door. Now later never comes because you've just lost it all with that guy who walked out.
Well, and
like
this to me is not just about an individual person and tribal knowledge. This is documentation of what went well or what went wrong on installation.
Right.
It's documentation of a ticket and resolution and what steps did this person go through to figure out that the microwave was what was causing a problem with the internet signal. Documentation is key, and I really do stand by that. You've got to at least have some repository that everybody uses. I do not believe in you having your notes in Google and you having your notes in SharePoint and me having my notes in my phone. That doesn't help anybody. You have to have a repository for all the
We had
information.
one centralized point.
That should be a goal for sure.
So,
My last parting statement is help the future you. Document it now.
oh, help the future.
I agree.
Back to the future.
You agree? Then you
I
love
do.
it.
So delaying documentation until later. Here's how I thought of this one. It's not never documenting, but in my experience, if you, and I guess in documentation, I'm thinking of process documentation. So let's frame it around that. I don't think, how do I put this? If you make documentation step one for a brand new process, you are not getting that out of the way. You're going to spend a whole bunch of time documenting a detailed process. You're going to put it into action. You're going to find what works, what doesn't, and then you're going to have to rewrite the whole damn thing anyway.
Okay, that's semantics. I think you're taking that to the extreme.
That's not semantics. I'm saying that I would rather do it later than first. I'm not starting with documentation.
Well, you have to build a process before you can document the process.
I think you can communicate a framework. You can have a concept, but I would not go into detailed documentation until I field tested it.
Yeah.
I
So
can
I
agree with
think
that.
our definition of laters were a bit different.
Right.
So because I totally
It's words.
agree with
Here
you.
we are again with words.
You can't start documenting that outside field tech install properly. You're going to be rewriting that 1,000 times until you've done it enough. But the real risk is, okay, now I've done it enough. I know how to do it. Well, I don't need to document it now. That's where I'm thinking the until later, and where I've seen a lot of people use that until later to be never.
It makes me think of we'll clean up our cable spaghetti mess later. We'll come back later. It's working now, so we'll do that later. Later never comes.
Later never comes.
Let's see if we can end this on a point of harmony here. So last love it or hate it. Field technicians should not have admin tasks. Love it or hate it.
We're not going to get consensus on this.
No.
I hate it.
Love it.
Oh, he flipped my way this time. I like it.
Well, I didn't flip. This is just
you-
my opinion.
I'm going to take the win where I can get the win, Rick. I know why I hate it, but why do you hate it?
It's tough. This is another one where it's like, I wish this had a third side on this paddle. And it's another one where it's words. Field technicians should not have admin tasks. Sounds very absolute to me. And I am a fervent
These are not
believer.
the droids that you seek, right? It's like they don't have to do any of it.
Right. And I think that could be pretty dangerous. And I certainly am, just to be clear, I'm a fervent believer that you should minimize this as much as possible. It's expensive to have people in the field. Their time is valuable. That they can do things for the business that no other people can while they're in the field. So they should not be burdened with admin tasks that otherwise can be accomplished. But I have trouble with the absolutes because, well, first of all, I think if you spoke this into existence, you would be creating a bunch of field divas, and that's already sometimes a bit of a challenge, right? But I also think there are certain admin tasks that you want to capture that while they're in the field. If you're getting notes or taking pictures or uploading information
was
or
a
what have
contract
you,
signed, or was a credit card put on file?
you don't want to do this after. You want to capture them while the details are fresh. So as an absolute, I just can't get behind it.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's really there are administrative tasks in any job in an operation. Just period. I don't think you can absolve them of all responsibility for administrative tasks. And it could be that they're taking inventory in their truck. That is an admin task. If something's not looking right on the account, making sure that they're checking back with the office and making some verifications happen. So I just don't think they get a free pass.
We just all agree. I just bought my paddles. Love it. Because I said, their greatest value is in installing and repairing and doing what they're out there to do. But the reality is, automate as many of the admin tasks as you can. But unfortunately, you can't. So I didn't read it as an absolute. I read it as, in general, they should not have admin tasks. And I believe that, and I heard you say it too. Minimize them. So,
Yeah.
So we flipped our paddles differently, but we all had the same.
But in my mind, I want to know what a field diva crown looks like. That's awesome. Does it have a little tower in the middle?
We may find out.
We may find out.
But it has to be able to handle the wind so it doesn't blow off when you're up on the rough.
I'll straighten your crown any day, Larry.
All right. Operational bottlenecks don't show up on a network map, but they hurt just as much. Sonar helps ISPs stay proactive by catching small issues before they slow everything down. Stay ahead with sonar.software.
All right. So we are going to wrap this all up with one final question. And that question is, what if your undocumented processes walk out the door? What do you do?
It happens, and it can happen by employee turnover. It can happen through illness, and unfortunately, it can happen through death, which is a reality. And you have to cobble together what you can find out. You may have to go to multiple staff members, and Larry may have a piece of the pie, and Rick may have a piece of the pie, and Georgette may have a piece of the pie, and you're going to have to cobble it together.
Yeah, this is the whole thing we've been talking about this entire episode. The getting hit by the bus factor.
Right. This
Can
is
I
everything
still say
catching up
that?
with
I
you.
mean, is that still
Well, that's a
okay to
real
say?
thing. I know an ISP who literally had one of their staff members hit by a bus, and he had significant tribal knowledge.
Right. So you have to be documenting that process because it's going to happen, and that's just one way it's going to happen. The other way is somebody's going to leave to go somewhere else, or
And
Right.
take your tribal knowledge
and
somewhere
take your
else.
tribal knowledge. So you have to do it. So documenting our processes, certainly helps. And like you mentioned earlier, AI loves to generate documentation for you. So these days, people who don't have documentation are just not doing themselves right because you can take that knowledge, give it to AI, and produce really good documents that you can provide for.
I believe that you have to calendar this. You have to put documentation days on your calendar every quarter. Maybe it's new documentation. You've got some deficits you need to fill in the gaps for. Maybe it's reviewing to make sure that all your nomenclature is still the same.
Refreshing things
Refreshing
as
things
evolution
as you
happens.
evolve organizationally.
Yep.
That is the other thing that we didn't talk about. Out-of-date documentation is almost worse, I would say, than not having
I agree.
documentation. And this has to be a commitment from the get-go by everybody because documentation always needs to be maintained. And when you let it fall out of date, then you're better off not having.
Georgette, you gave the extreme example of someone passing away, and my next point would not apply there. But let's say someone quits, leaves.
Mm-hmm.
If truly this is something that no one else in the organization knows, and it is critical information, I personally would not be above going to that person, and I think you would have to do it under a contractor, like really, as a contractor, so to have some bounds and make sure you're going to walk away with what you need. But I would not be above paying for that information, because you have to look at the business impact, and if that's going to backfill that information and allow you to move forward, and they truly are the keeper of the keys, then I think that's better than the impact of just trying to trot forward.
If you have that option,
depending on when they leave,
depending on the
leave,
circumstances
they
under
may
which they
just
left.
say,
I think it's
"Forget
worth
it,
trying."
I'm not doing it.
The answer is always no unless you ask.
Exactly. Yeah. Excellent. Well, I appreciate you guys keeping me honest, and until next time.
Until next time.
Operations don't stop at the office. Next time, we're heading into the field, breaking down hard-earned field operation lessons and what ISPs wish they knew before rolling trucks at scale.
Remember, when you connect communities, you unlock what's possible. Until next time.